Hello, welcome. We've been talking about education and we talked about classical and liberal education, and we've mentioned that there are two senses in which we can understand a classical education. We can understand it as grounded in the classical languages, the languages of antiquity, like Greek and Latin. And then there's a whole system that builds up from there, beginning with the grammar of those languages. But we can also bring it more into the present day and talk about a classical education which is based on the classics. And we define those as the timeless, dateless masterpieces, cultural artifacts that have stood the test of time in the sense of embodying universal values that a whole civilization can embrace and learn from, whether in literature, the fine arts, architecture, and so on. Similarly, with liberal education, there are two senses, at least two senses, two main senses in which the word can be used. We mentioned that liber means free, liberal means free, therefore this is the education that befits a free man, a free person, somebody who is at leisure, who's not a slave, but who is at leisure to give time to the cultivation of the learning that is required to enjoy the finer things of life. That's a limited sense. There's another sense that has application for today, that has broader application for today, that is a better understanding of liberal, and that is liberal is free in the sense that it is free from utility. Many things we study are for the sake of utility, for their usefulness, for what they will allow us to do in this world. For example, if you study engineering, it can lead to your being able to design cities and build bridges and machines, which can be used. There's advantage to the masses in the use of new technology, in the use of the infrastructure that we all depend upon in our cities and so on. So engineering would be an example of a utilitarian study. If a new medicine is created that has utility, a lot of medicines are created which don't really have utility. They may be created in order to make money. The pharmaceutical companies, as we know, as we've experienced, they are driven by profit to their shareholders, profit to the people at the top, and sometimes, sadly, more money can be made by people continuing in patterns of disease and even morbidity, because then you can keep prescribing medicines and so on. Whereas if you were to heal something with a genuine medicine or healing technique, the person is free of disease, but there's not as much money to be made in that scenario. But let's say medicine produces something that's of real value, then that's also utilitarian. And utility goes along with pragmatism. We spoke about John Dewey and the pragmatic approach to education. which says that what we need to learn and the theories that are useful are those that are instrumentalizable. They can be shown to work to produce something. So, this second sense of liberal meaning free means free from utility. So it's about education that doesn't have as its aim the need to generate some product or something that is obviously useful to our life in the world. It's education that is engaged in for its own sake. There is the understanding that there is a value in studying certain things because of the state of mind they produce in the student. Shakespeare said, if music be the food of love, play on. Well, art is the fuel of the soul. We need to continue to be feeding our souls, not in order to have some end utility, but in order to grow as human beings so that we can live a well-rounded life. And the great proponents of liberal education, like John Henry Newman from the 19th century and so on, made the point that if you get a liberal education and you learn how to think, if your mind is being trained, and then you learn the practical skills on the job, you have a lot of resourcefulness. So much so, in fact, that you can do a better job on the practical side than if you didn't get a liberal education. And this makes sense as well because the ability to communicate can be advantageous. The ability to think rationally and consecutively, which comes from a liberal education, can be advantageous in any job. The ability to understand diverse points of view can be advantageous if you're working in a team and you have to collaborate with people who have different perspectives and different backgrounds. Certainly the ability to do calculations, to work with numbers, to work with texts, to critically analyse, can all help. And besides which, what's all this utility for? You might learn auto mechanics and be able to fix a car, which is very useful. We all know that. Then you get in the car and you drive the car to some destination. But what do you do when you get to that destination? What's the car for, ultimately? It's to take you somewhere.
Transport.
It is transport. But how do you know which place you need to be transported to? I don't mean your schedule demands that you be at a particular appointment at a particular time. I'm saying that we make choices about how to live. We've all got technology. Well, most of us have technology at our fingertips. But what's the right way to use it? How does it serve a truly human purpose? Because our human lives down here are not just about surviving. They're about ultimate meaning. They're about surviving on purpose. So we have to know what things are for. And a liberal education, which teaches you how to think and how to mine the great works of the past, to contemplate them, help you grasp a sense of meaning so that you know how to live. So also that you know how to relate to other human beings, how to be social, how to entertain, how to enjoy life. Because just having things doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to know how to enjoy life. We know that just having money doesn't guarantee that you'll have taste. Maybe you can hire somebody to exercise taste on your behalf. Hire a stylist, an interior decorator, and a life planner, a life coach, and so on. So, a liberal education, in the modern sense, would involve studying the humanities, having a place for the humanities. And there is a bit of a crisis here because for many decades, in fact, for over a century, there has been a drift in the direction of people maybe beginning a humanities course. You know what I mean by the humanities. Such subjects as English, history, philosophy, the subjects that require you to think and understand the human experience. The great writers write about the human experience. So those subjects people may have begun a course in, and then after a while they decide to change tack and get into the hard sciences, what are today called the STEM subjects. Science, STEM, technology, engineering, mathematics, all of which are important, but they work well when they're blended with the humanities. They're like two sides of the human brain. You need both to be a fully functioning human being. A lot of people aren't even going into the humanities. They think education is simply vocationally driven. It's about getting the degree that will get you the job. Whereas, and we talked about, the three purposes of education. Certainly, vocational placement is one purpose, but so are the learnings of a religious community, oral and written, to keep up traditions based on Holy Scriptures and the interpretation thereof, and people get schooled in that. That's a form of education too. But the one that we're concentrating on is about civic development. It's about development of the citizen, to be a good citizen. And a liberal education is not primarily geared to vocational placement. It's something that is studied, not for the sake of the product that's going to come at the end, not for the sake of the job that's going to come at the end of the course of learning, but for the sake of the person. For the sake of the person that student will grow into. Nourished by the liberal arts, that person's consciousness, which is invisible, in a sense you can't show your consciousness, but that consciousness will express itself in the world. It will have an intention. It will derive meaning from things. Life is never boring for a person who is on this path of education, because education is a lifelong journey. And good literature also enables us to inhabit characters and their motivations, and to see the world through their eyes. And this can help us make meaning of our own lives, to see the world in different and interesting and diverse ways. So two senses of the classical education and two senses of the liberal education. our next recording, we will go back to the traditional liberal arts and use them as a platform for deeper philosophical investigation. But if we just stick for a moment with the modern sense of a liberal education, you'll notice that most colleges and institutions that call themselves centres for a liberal education create their own curricula based on subjects like English and history and philosophy and theology and music and the fine arts. Does that make sense, Belinda?
It does, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. So the modern sense of a classical education matches up well with the modern sense of a liberal education, because the content of the curricula for the liberal education will be made up of the classics.
That's right. And anything that's classic is dateless anyway.
Yes, dateless in the sense that
it has a certain tone to it which makes it dateless and can be enjoyed from generation to generation.
Yes.
And appreciated.
So a play by Aeschylus from ancient Greece can still have relevance to today. Sigmund Freud, for example, can look at ancient Greek drama and derive some themes which he applies to modern psychology. And so when we're learning modern psychology, it reposes upon Freud's familiarity with some classical texts. When we look at Dante and Shakespeare and Chaucer and Milton and so on, there are universal themes in their work, Jane Austen, that are not just relevant to their day, but are relevant to us today. I mean, Jane Austen wrote in a very class-conscious world, and her characters are a study in, to what extent do people marry for social promotion, and to what extent do they marry for love? Now, I think that theme is relevant today. Mm-hmm. But even if we look at a piece of sculpture, Michelangelo's David, which is often been described as the perfect sculpture of a man, we can contemplate the beauty in the human form. If we look at Michelangelo's Moses, such an imposing figure, what does it bring up in us? Is this a depiction of the great lawgiver, a depiction of authority, of seriousness and intent, the look in his face? Or Rodin's The Thinker. These are idealized parts of our humanity, which are then concretized in a certain medium. You might start with the ideal of, thinking, and then how can we depict that in marble? And we need those ideals today too, because we still need to answer the question, what is thinking? So that's a little excursus into the modern ideas of a classical and a liberal education.